I am thinking of a client that I've worked with who his organization is supplying the coaching. So he had a really hard time at the beginning sharing anything on a personal level. So would try to totally keep it work related and that kind of thing. As much as I and his employer would let him know this is okay. You could talk about whatever you want in there. It's all confidential. This is for you. And we see it as holistic. Still really struggled. But then what happened was as he began to open up more about the personal things that were happening at home, the lack of voice that he felt like he had, the inability to put himself first and to navigate saying no to things that didn't work for him. What actually happened was he became a lot less bitter toward his spouse and the people that he lived with because he didn't feel like a doormat, that he was just being walked all over all the time because he found his voice and he could say, I don't want to do that. And that doesn't work for me. This does work for me. This is what I want. What happened was not only did he learn to use his voice at home, which impacted his relationship because he wasn't bitter toward his spouse anymore and actually began to like her and enjoy her more as he used his voice. But he also found that the same was true at work. He found that he became less resentful of the organization, less resentful of his role there because he started to say no and set limits on his time and energy and really hold other people accountable for what they should have been doing all along. That's the tricky part of being a people pleaser, right? That we don't always talk about is people pleasing doesn't even sound like a bad thing. It's like, great, you're making other people happy. But the problem with that is that it leads to bitterness and resentment. That's a really good barometer of whether you've got issues with boundaries. Is feeling resentful? Are you feeling bitter in your relationship? That is a really good sign that something is happening that you are not okay with happening. And so either you're tolerating behavior you shouldn't be tolerating, or you've even created this atmosphere. And so what happened was not only did he learn to use his voice at home, which impacted his relationship because he wasn't bitter toward his spouse anymore and actually began to like her and enjoy her more as he used his voice. But he also found that the same was true at work, right? He found that he became less resentful of the organization, less resentful of his role there because he started to say no and set limits on his time and energy and really hold other people accountable for what they should have been doing all along. I had gotten into this pattern where he was taking on too much that was not actually in his job description or in his role. And sure, people are going to let you take on that work, but as soon as he realized, okay, this is actually isn't mine, he may have even anticipated that that wouldn't be met well, but it was actually, and people adjust and are fine because really we're responsible for how people treat us. We're either being treated in a way that we've created or we've tolerated. I think that John Talbot Cloud said that. And I find it to be so true. So everything leveled up at home in his relationship with his wife as well as the court. Yeah, it's really our responsibility to let people know how we want to be treated. And we are always letting people know how we want to be treated by either tolerating the behavior they're demonstrating or creating it in different ways, right? So it's up to us to say, this doesn't work for me. I don't like that, to set those limits and the parameters on how we're treated. And so it really gives us a lot more power when you think of it this way, that really we're responsible for letting people know what we're okay with and what we're not okay with. And when you can shift out of that like kind of victim stance almost that is this woe is me or how dare they, right? It actually empowers you to say, what is it about the way that I've interacted with this person that makes them think it's okay to talk to me like that or makes it okay for them to expect this of me, right? And so it causes us to get curious with ourselves because we're in control. If we actually have the power, we can shift that. Okay, so it makes sense that you would think that I would do this, XYZ for you because I haven't asked and I'm actually not doing that. So that's such a great question. So the question is, how does fear how does fear impact the process of people doing this type of, especially boundaries work? Well, we all fail to set boundaries or have difficult conversations or be direct out of fear. There's a fear that's driving us. So is it a fear that the person will leave us? What we learned growing up is that if we set a boundary, if we say no, people go away. Or if we tell them we don't like, they'll go away, right? Or maybe it's a fear that they'll get big and retaliate. Maybe that was your experience at some point in your life. You set a limit, you set a boundary, and somebody got big and they got scary. So you to keep the peace by making waves. Another thing we do is we fragilize other people. We think that they're too fragile and they can't handle the truth. So anytime you think, well, I just don't want to hurt them, or it's not that big of a deal. I don't want to, make them sad or hurt. I like to tell people that there's a difference between hurting somebody and harming somebody. It often does hurt to hear the truth, right? Think about times when somebody has given you feedback that it's not comfortable to hear. It's not comfortable to hear that you did something wrong or that you hurt somebody or impacted somebody in a certain way. It doesn't feel good. And yet that's what actually helps us to grow. It helps us to know how to love that person better, how to work with that person better. And so, our tendency is to fragilize people if they can't handle the truth, that they'll crumble under the weight of it, or they'll cry, or they'll, you know. So actually, it keeps us from telling the truth because fear that they're actually a lot stronger. Or even the ones, and probably especially the ones that don't act like it. I'm thinking about people in my life that, or actually clients that I've even worked with where they set the limits, they said the thing that was difficult to say, um, even though they feared the person can handle it, and the person does crumble and cry, like very fragile. Problem is that can be a really helpful defense mechanism for them to never have to face it. If they cry every time they're given feedback, so people stop giving them feedback, then they never have to hear feedback, right? They never actually grow. I'm not saying that people are consciously aware of this. I don't think that they're aware that they're doing this. And it does help them to avoid the pain. I make you think they're too fragile to handle it. So there's lots of reasons that we are to direct or don't set boundaries. And those are all operating from this place of fear. Fear that they'll retaliate, fear that they'll pull away, they'll lose the relationship, they'll crumble, it will hurt them. The reality is all of that fear is based on that fundamental truth to belong and be connected. Right? And so again, it always comes back to that deep need to be loved and to belong. And it doesn't feel good when people don't like us. Use that sense, or if they're at us, or if they pull away from us, we're left alone. And so on a much deeper and less conscious level than most of us are operating in, 95% of the time, fear drives so much of our interaction with people at work. Self-limiting beliefs are everywhere. We're all walking around with tons of self-limiting beliefs without realizing them. And you don't really realize them until you come up against them, right? So it's the owner of a company who wants to grow 10x, and actually when they start to do the work, she gets this scarcity feeling, or suddenly we can't hire because we're scared that maybe we won't meet, or too difficult to imagine the money going out, or whatever it is, right? So then suddenly these self-limiting beliefs come up. And so if we don't address those, then we're kind of just constantly pushing against them, but they're still there and they're still impacting. Where if that same business owner turns inward, turns to a coach and processes, gosh, what is this that's coming up in me? Why am I feeling like everything's so tight? And then we can go back to, what'd you learn about money? What'd you learn about growth? What'd you learn about success? What are those beliefs that you have that maybe you've never turned toward or put words to? And so the only way to actually then 10x the company would be to navigate those so that we can push forward. Otherwise, we're just continuing to come up against a brick wall. There's tons of self-limiting beliefs that show up all the time with my clients. There's limiting beliefs around finances, limiting beliefs around confidence, capability. There's limiting beliefs around, I'm trying to think of different
Like value.
people I've worked with.
Why would you say that with another client that they didn't know that they?
Oh, yeah, they're like their own value. Yeah, self-limiting beliefs can show up in this space of feeling like you're competent to do the work that you've been hired to do, right? So, especially if I'm trying to get back to like actual stories and think of people because I do feel like that. Like,
So you told us the story about a woman who.
yeah.
Can you just tell me that story again in the context?
Yeah. So one woman that I worked with joined the group really because she'd done work like this in the past, but she was starting to go through what was going to turn out to be a pretty awful divorce. And in this process, I will say the first year it was difficult to even show up beyond just having need, right? There, it was awful. She was, in her best space. And so for that first year, her growth work, what she really wanted to do professionally was to double her income. She needed to replace her spouse's income. And so yeah, each month she showed up and she had these two goals, right? Of like surviving the divorce in a way that, navigates relationships and all other things that matter. And also to increase her business at the same time. And so it was incredible to see with the support of the group. I mean, and when I tell you showing up needy, like this woman embraced showing up needy, which is great. This is what we need to do. But she was able to show up and say, I've got nothing to give today, or, I even need to take a nap, or you could call her homework partners in between and say, gosh, I'm so struggling. Help me navigate this, horrific thing I'm experiencing right now. Um, so the support of the group in a relational way was paramount for her, but then also in the professional space of using work groups to say, okay, this is the income that I have charted coming in for this year. What can I do to double it? Here are some of my ideas. Help me sort through what's going to be the most lucrative. What do I actually have the space and capacity for? And using the group for both the accountability toward those professional goals, but also the support in both the professional and the personal and just relational space. She was able to double her income that year and actually came back the next year like, why couldn't I double it again? And so then that year, some, different things come up, right? Because it's like, oh, felt okay growing to this space. Like, what would people think of me if I actually made this much money? So, right, more self-limiting beliefs come up. And so not having the space where you can talk about those things, where you can navigate those and just give words to them, have people bear witness to this thing that's happening in you. Typically, the strategy is go at it alone, put your head down, keep trudging forward, right? And just try to make it happen by sheer willpower. And what we know, even from the neuroscientific research, is that willpower wears out. And if you don't have the support that you need and the accountability that you need in a much deeper space, fizzle. And so she did it. She essentially quadrupled her income in 2 years of doing this work with the support of the group, which I know she would point to as paramount to that process. Um, okay, do you want to think of a guy example?
Do you find just in general that women have larger success in the groups, or is it equal?
I think it's really just that I've worked so much with the last 2 years that that's coming to mind. No, I really love working in co-ed groups and having men and women in the space, because you gain so much access to to perspectives that you would never have access to before. It's in the workforce. It's so isolating anyway. Like, where do we talk about things that are personal and that sort of thing? Especially with the opposite gender. Man, the first year that I was in an executive group like this, every day I would leave that executive group on the phone with my husband, like, I'm so sorry. Now I see that I must be doing this. This must be how you feel, all these things because I'm in a group with, at that group, there were a lot of men in the group. And so I would hear all of their perspectives of their side of the arguments with their spouses or the financial issues or the whatever. And so just gain so much more awareness of that. And even ways to work through those kinds of things. In those spaces, a woman who's maybe feels less than a man or maybe has trouble selling to a man or things like that. In a group with men, you have practice. You can talk to men about that and you can see what's actually going on in them. You can role reverse. You can gain so much from that space that you wouldn't otherwise. And vice versa with men too. Like, none of us really know how we're impacting people in work and in life until people give us feedback. I think that's one of the crucial things about the group is in what other spaces do you have people that love you and are for you, and have no agenda and can give you feedback, honest feedback about how they perceive you. In a safe space where you can actually navigate it, right? With the help of this facilitator that's going to help you do that. It's scary to give feedback. It's scary to kind of work through some of those things and be honest. And yet, I mean, what, yeah. Um, Men self-limiting belief. ways that it shows up.
Do you have tea in your cup?
I have hot water.
Yeah, I know I'm asking you to seriously, man.
Yeah.
You're doing a lot of talking. So, I like Thursday.
Okay.
Well,
Here's what I could say.
okay.
Oftentimes, especially when I'm working with men, I find that they don't have a lot of other spaces where they can be seen and known on a deeper level. There's not a lot of spaces for them to actually share things that are hard. And so, lots of times, men will hire me for executive coaching and find that it's not only a safe space to navigate relationships and dynamics in their business, but it's also a safe space to talk about their personal stuff. And so, I think about a client that I walked through like this awful loss of a child, actually. I think back to that year of work. I'm like, who else would he have had to hold that kind of space for him that didn't have those trite sayings that, that really knew how to create space and safety to feel all the big things you're feeling, even those things that feel shameful to feel, right? Those things.
So when you say space, can you define that a little bit more? Where you're like, they had space to be. What does that mean?
Yeah. What does it mean to actually create space or
Yeah.
have space?
What does that have
Yeah.
space?
So to me, having space or creating space for somebody is giving them an opportunity to see themselves, to be known, to air out the things that are going on in their heart and in their body and mind. There's not always the space to do, right? We're walking through each day, waking up, we've got our task list. So many of us are just going on autopilot most of the time and getting the things done that we need to get done. We're all task driven, right? We're in that masculine energy, the going and the doing. And there's very little spaces where people can just be. And even in that space of being, be discovered by another human, but to have someone be curious and lean in and draw even more from you and you typically even have access to. That's what I mean about creating space is it's a place where all these parts of you that matter can show up. Don't always have space to show up.
So would it be, if you were to like define the thing without using the word, would it be, is it a life having time, opportunity, freedom, and safety? Like, is it all of that in the same bucket? Is that what space is?
Time, freedom, safe.
And then maybe interest, because then you have somebody who is interested in what is going on. I mean, I'm just curious
Yeah.
because when that phrase space,
Yeah, it feels more like an experience.
more like an
Yeah. And creating space, having space. You're actually creating an experience where
Okay.
somebody can feel, know, and see exist. You're giving them space to show,
given.
space to get curious about what else is there for them. I'll often start group meetings with some type of exercise where we're just breathing and getting mindful, feeling the floor beneath you. We're really good at doing, and we're really as experience.
So you mentioned just a little while ago when we were talking, you're doing some EQ work with stuff.
Yeah, I don't know if I want to like necessarily sell that because that's I'm contracted to do that work for a university, but I do. But I could speak about EQ work in general. They'll train on that and stuff.
Can you tell me a little bit? So I'm, when you say that you do EQ work, if you're not talking about words, but just in general, what is EQ work?
Yeah, so when I'm talking about EQ work, I'm talking about emotional intelligence, which is really all about self-awareness. It's about figuring out how you Emotional intelligence is really all about awareness of self and awareness of other. And believe it or not, a lot of even executives and people who are running businesses and in leadership positions really can lack some basic EQ skills. Like they're really proficient and great at their jobs and getting things done, but don't necessarily understand why this employee is always saying that they're mean or they're too direct or those kinds of things, right? And so in EQ work, I'm helping clients to learn really practical skills on how to listen well. Most people do not listen well. Even as a trained therapist, I will say I do not always listen well. I have to kind of put on the listening hat and tune into the skills to be able to listen. And really, key listening skills are going to help you tune in to where the other person is coming. And so at a fundamental level, the other person is not going to walk away with any kind of great new insights or things like that if they haven't felt heard. We have to feel heard and understood and known in order to move on. And actually, there's neuroscientific evidence of this, right? If we're hijacked or if we're feeling a thing, until somebody feels that with us or helps us identify that feeling, we literally can't move on from that side of the brain. And so once somebody is like, it sounds like you're feeling really frustrated. Yes, I am, blah, blah, blah. Okay, now I can move to the logical side of my brain. I literally don't have access to the logical side until this thing that is firing that feels important, that is creating these feelings, is attuned to. So it's kind of like that. Have you ever had this where you call somebody to vent about something and they just they're awful at listening. You do not feel heard. You do not feel understood. And you get off and you're like, well, frick, I need to call somebody else, right? Because they actually didn't give you the validation that you needed or the acceptance that you needed in what you're feeling. What you needed was for them to say, I hear you. This. Then you can move on. That's really all you need. And it is actually a relational need. We do need that from other humans. We need to be seen and known in order to thrive in our work.
I want to know about the cats.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh my God. Gosh, I don't even know how to talk about that without like making it sound like almost patronizing, like because so much. Okay, let me say this. Yeah, so many of the men that I work with don't even realize how little access they have to themselves until we start working together.
What does it mean to have little access to yourself?
So how it shows up in relationship is feeling really disconnected from their spouse of years. It's running the organization, but kind of not really knowing if you're making any impact. It, yeah, it's showing up in these ways. Kind of there's just this underlying feeling like something is missing, or maybe not, because this is just all they've known. And then they come and they start doing this work either with me, one-to-one coaching, or in a group process. And suddenly everything, it's like it was black and white and now it's in color. And they're like, oh, this is why my son doesn't know I'm proud of him because I've never done this. I've never connected with him on this level or shared these things. Or, wow, like perspectives change and it's suddenly like values are different. I no longer value just the bottom line and increasing that, but I actually value like my relationship with my kid or how my employees feel as a result of working for this organization. And so, often that doesn't come up until there's like high turnover or things like that, that they'll even begin to take a look at it. And then you realize that, and the evidence is clear in the literature, that if you don't do EQ well as an organization, you are leaving a lot on the table because turnover is higher. People need to feel like they matter, they belong in a place, and that's no different in the workspace. And so it's helping leaders to gain access to their values, their passions, their really why, so that the people can attach to that. It's one thing for them to know, like, yeah, we're doing really important work. I know my why, like it's, XYZ, and this is why it matters in the world. But until you realize that your clients need to know that and your employees need to know that, yeah, and well, I don't really know how to say that, but it's how to them giving that to them in a different way because they give it differently. I work with a lot of men who will do EQ coaching, or sorry, no. I work with a lot of men who find executive coaching because they are just achievers. They want to continue to level up in every way. And so executive coaching sounds like a way that would help me to level up. Right. And so often what they realize is, man, I have leveled up in all these other kind of performance indicators. And this is the piece that's been missing. It's the holistic piece, the emotional work, the emotional maturity and growth, the relational maturity and growth that was needed. And that festers up into every relationship and work and life.
So when it comes to your ideal client, love your if you and it is something that has to be a particular client, but like the success, the ideal success of when someone comes in and the time that somebody leaves, like what's the transformation process for you to be like, this would be such a to see somebody come. These characteristics,
Yeah.
these
Yeah.
traits.
So wins in coaching are like when a client comes in feeling kind of numb. They're doing all the work and they are achieving on paper and they are depleted. And by the end of a year or whatever we've done work together, they're alive and they have free time and they have hobbies and they're setting limits and they're connected to their why and their passion because they've done all of this work to learn, about boundaries and taking care of themselves and really figuring out who they are in the process. Another success story would be a pretty isolated leader coming in and feeling like in all the spaces just have to have it all together. And that by the end of the year, having actually been able to do deep work in themselves because they finally had a place where they could share all these things. Or maybe they came in looking like they were achieving, but actually they were addicted to pornography or considering an extramarital affair or, you know, um, avoiding or ignoring these parts of the business that they knew needed attention. And they were doing all those things because they were just surviving. But after doing a lot of work, coming in and having a space where they can do this work, are leaving feeling like all of these pieces that had no place to get processed have now had been resolved. And so they're leaving, you know, uh, connected with themselves. And they're often we know that it has been successful coaching because by the end of the year, they're saying things like, my spouse doesn't even recognize me anymore. She's like, what are you doing? Do more of it. Sign up again, like, re up or whatever, because they're just getting more of their spouse than they've had. And the same thing is true in organization. I work with leaders that suddenly their performance evaluations and things like that are looking so different because their employees are saying things like, that you've been really direct with me. Now I'm really clear on what you need from me, and that's been really helpful. And looking at the things where maybe before the leader was have difficult time being clear and direct. So we did work to level up their voice and their boundaries and those kinds of things.
I think it's really powerful that you add this spouse's perspective into. So, talk to me more about what it means to be numb. So, if you like, when you experience somebody that is in this state, what do you typically see?
Yeah, when I have a client coming in who feels just kind of numb, they're usually coming in because somebody else has told them to, that they should maybe do something because they're so used to being in this state of numb that they don't even know there's something else out there. There's something different. And so sometimes the numbness is because there's just not capacity. They've run themselves ragged and they haven't set boundaries and that kind of thing. Sometimes the numbness comes from having to split off all these less than ideal parts of themselves, right? Because there's like, oh, there's this part of the business is struggling, and so I can't even like pay attention to that. So I'm putting that, or my I don't know what to do about my marriage, so it's just been on the back burner, or whatever it is. They're just learning. We've all learned to just do, and so they've been doing, and doing, and had no space to actually. And so they're often coming in because somebody else is encouraging them to come in and do the work, do some work with me, and that it's a really beautiful and rewarding process to be able to kind of sift through these things and be a thought partner with them and create space for them to process these things so that they're not alone in it. Because we're so used to just navigating everything on our own and thinking, well, I'm not the only one. Everybody else has problems too, and they're all figuring it out. So I should just be able to figure it out. When really, the people who are thriving in organizations, their marriages, and all these spaces, they're probably not doing it alone. They do have a lot of support process. And so being able to be let into those spaces, to see those spaces, and to contain and help build. From a coaching perspective, we really come into coaching believing that the person in front of us is already creative and resourceful and whole on their own. And really, what they need is a space to help discover those parts of themselves that are already there. And that's like the most rewarding thing to do is help them to discover these parts of themselves that already have the answers, already know the things that can kind of process.
Well, this is great. This is great. Of all the things that we've talked about and touched base on, is there anything in particular that you're like, we'll make sure that we address this?
And maybe like the group work thing, like the power of group, because it's so much of what I really.
So we did do quite a bit in the other room.
Yeah, that's true.
Mm-hmm. But why? I mean, like, if you were to say someone is coming to you and they say, I don't know if I need just singular counseling or if I need group work, how would you? Do you ever do like group work and individual work at the same time?
Yeah. So actually, every group that I do includes coaching, one-to-one coaching. And so I love doing group work and one-to-one coaching in tandem because you get the power of the group and that dynamic. And then also you can go deep with me one-on-one. It's kind of laser focused for you. So to somebody who's questioning, should I do individual work or group work? Well, my first answer is yes, do it all. If you can do it all, do it all. But it really depends on the person. Some people are really, it would be really difficult to open up in a group process. And so for a lot of clients, we need to do more one-to-one work uh, before they join a group process because it is terrifying. If you've never had somebody where you let them in to kind of see these parts of you, the idea of opening those parts up to a whole group would be terrifying. And so sometimes you need to create some relational safety with just, one human. If you kind of, back to that developmental model, if your attachment has been like avoidant because you learned that it's not safe, that people aren't safe, you're not going to be a fit for a group yet, right? You have to have some experiences where you can experience that actually people are safe and a source of good. That. So there are some people that I would actually recommend doing one-on-one coaching first. But I'm just a junkie. I'm gonna jump in. One other thing we could talk about is the difference between counseling and coaching.
Yes, actually, I thought about that in the other room. So, what's the difference between counseling and coaching?
Yeah, so let's talk about this difference between counseling and coaching. I've heard it said that counseling helps you survive, coaching helps you thrive. I like that. Very quick, easy definition. For me, because I am trained as a licensed counselor and I do use a lot of my therapeutic skills with the client, I would describe it as, counseling is coming from a place of broken to a place of restored. Whereas coaching fundamentally assumes that you are whole as you are, and we're helping you get to the next level. And so we're going to use similar skills at times than I would use in counseling to help you get to there. To go back, because I know I can't unknow the neuroscience, right? And what it points to as much as my coaching training might have me in a certain silo, I can't unknow what I know about how people actually grow and change. And so I'm going to use those skills to help you get from this place of kind of, yeah, okay, to really getting to the next level to thriving. So again, the difference between counseling and coaching, counseling, we look backwards in order to get to a place where we're okay now. So we're going to look backwards to heal and to restore. In coaching, we are more anticipating how do we move forward? How do we get in the future? And so we're going to look toward the past, but in a way that helps us to get unstuck where we are so that we can launch forward. But the goal with coaching is always more future oriented and more future driven. Like, how do we get from here to there? Whereas counseling is more, how do we heal from that?
Yeah, it does. You tell me. Um, Now, but here's what will happen, okay? Well, I can't say, but here's what my perceived is that we're gonna have done all this discussing today, and that you might lay in bed tonight and be like, I shouldn't. It's for a great example. I just didn't think of it.
Yeah.
Right. So get open up Trello and then put a like next time thing and just like start putting them in that car. And then that way, when you're like, okay, we've done this once, we've got our process, and seeing how everything's coming together, I really want to put these kind of things on the content they're putting out. Then we can take another day down the road.
Okay, I think I have two things on my mind right now that I could maybe talk about.
Okay.
People fuel, just this idea in general that we need other people.
Yes.
And oh, I don't know how much to. So, like on my website and stuff, you can see like that I really am about like helping people to like get at their fullest potential. Like, but and I don't know how much to like brand myself as distinctively Christian, but I could talk about like David Benner's book, The Gift of Being Yourself. It's all about like how we cannot truly know God without knowing ourselves, and we cannot know ourselves without growing God. And that, like, this process of diving deep in who we are and whose we are, um, I think this is the work of sanctification. This is the work. And I don't think that you can know God well if you can't look at yourself. I think it is a process of discovering you. And as you discover you, you discover God, and vice versa. I don't know how much I pigeonhole myself as only Christian because I do work with non-Christian clients too. But like, I do think that that is, like, I agree with David that that's truly like getting at the essence of who we are. Um, as we do that work, what we're discovering is who we were designed to, like our truest in Christ, what we uniquely bring to the world. Us on this for. I think you do that work through coaching work and counseling. Okay, the other thing I could say is John Townsend wrote a book called People Fuel, and it is all about how we need other people. You know, that this idea of like God and your spouse and your dog being enough, it just really is not enough. And it was never designed to be. We were never designed to operate that way. We were created for relationship and, from a relational God, even, if you're a Christian and you believe in that, the Father, Son, and Spirit that is three in one. And like inherently through relationship, it says, let us create man in our image, and in our image we create them, right? So it's a relational God creating people in his image is creating relational people. But it also just makes life so much easier to have people. Like, I could not do the work that I'm doing as a solopreneur if I didn't have on speed dial, three other solopreneurs in my texting group that literally were reaching out to each other every day, all day, for things like, I just lost my temper with my kids and I'm feeling sad about it, or I have this proposal that I'm working on. Does anybody have 15 minutes to hop on a call? Right? It's so, I can't even tell you how much it gives you to have people that you can call for these types of things, even when you're just like, you know, there's times when you can put it in a box, right? Like if you're at work and you're sad because you had a spat with your spouse before work, we could put that in a box addressed when we get home. But there's other times where that spat with your spouse is really keeping you from being productive. And so imagine if you just had somebody on speed dial and you could call and without any judgment or any advice giving, you could just share with them where you're at and they could with you in it. And then actually what we know from the neuroscience is that is what is helpful and you can move on then. That's really what you need. You don't need them to fix the issue with your spouse. And that's, what so many of us are, we're just terrible listeners. We don't know how to listen well. And that's why we do the EQ work and the emotional intelligence training and skills labs, because we aren't well trained in how to listen well or what people actually need. Rarely, if ever, do people need us to fix their problem when they come to us. And yet that's 9 out of the time what we go to is fixing the problem or giving them different perspectives or things like that. When, at least 95% of the time, what they're calling for is, or what they're reaching out for, what they really need is for us to just see them, say, yeah, or
Yeah.
I see you, right? And then they can move on. And that's enough. So yeah. So
It's called people.
people fuel. Yeah. People fuel. I forget what the tagline the read is. But yeah, this idea that just we're built for relationship and we're better in relationship.
How frequently do you work directly with John Tails?
Um, I work with him directly through Townsend Leadership Program. So one of the things I do is Townsend Leadership Program, TLP. So I'm a TLP director, and through that, I interface with them every month virtually, and we have a conference once a year. I'm also a professor at Townsend Institute for Leadership and Counseling, so I interface with him there. I teach probably a class at a time virtually, and then I fly out there each year for the residency where I get to lead process groups for unsuspecting counseling students coming in to this counseling program. They are then shoved into 10 hours of process group over 4 days, and it is so magical. They like emerge more fully free and more themselves at the end. I want to say they look like different humans at the end, but they're really not. They're just themselves, more access. Um,
Okay. Well, I think that's your breath.
yeah, so much. I'm feeling very tired, so